Hey everyone, welcome to the 14 Wins podcast. This is season 2, and I'm Bones, and with us as always is Rom X.
Hey everybody!
Hey Rom. Hey, what we're going to talk about is finally the Hitchhiker effect. We've been waiting to talk about this for a long time, and and also before that, we want to go into some of the news. So much news has passed. I mean,
Yeah,
we're talking
we've
about.
been, we've been off for a minute.
Yeah, God, just a month seems like a year.
Right. And there has been such a plethora of news that has happened in the UFO world. It'd be impossible to cover all of it. So we'll just hit the highlights. And the first one, I guess, would be those mummies.
I love the mummies.
Should we call them mummies or should we call them bodies?
It's hard to say, right? But I guess they're mummified in Peru, but it was presented to the Mexican government, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So Jaime Maussan, who is a well-known UFO researcher, he's been at it for a long time, but he's also somebody who takes in a lot of information and has brought bodies up before, and the bodies turned out to be something that was more terrestrial. So Gary Nolan, who is a scientist that we mentioned on this show before, has a really fancy, awesome machine that he used to analyze the last body that came through like this that was put forth by Jaime Maussan.
Right.
And it turned out to be something that he thought was a human with a birth defect. And I have no real reason to disbelieve him. He's an expert in this field. So people who have said that he was lying assume that he's some sort of government plant, but I don't think his behavior or research indicates that. So I think the last time this happened, it turned out to be something that was terrestrial. And there's a bunch of these weird cases that's worth mentioning where Native Americans, for example, there's a lot of cases where there have been giant bones found.
Right. Yep.
There's unusual amount. And that doesn't mean that they were giants. It doesn't mean but there is an unusual amount that does inspire some conspiracy stories and or conspiracy ideas, and that happens to be a weird. So it also could be that people who had birth defects or abnormalities in birth were looked on as being touched by God. That's pretty common in ancient cultures.
Right. Right.
So are these mummies that, or are they actual otherworldly beings?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I want to believe. You know, it's such a perfect story, and even the presentation. I'm a sucker for this presentation, the way they have them in these boxes. Those little mummies, the 3 fingers. I really want to believe, but I can't. There's just so much more information that we need. But God.
It's validation.
Pretty amazing.
I think it's what we'd all were, and you and I. So we've been off for a little bit, and we discussed it like when it happened, and we both had the same takeaway, which is there's no reason for this debate. This is material evidence. It should go to a third party lab.
Yep.
And we should all make the DNA results public. We should all be able to analyze it, and that's how we deal with this phenomenon. Or that's how we should. And maybe this is a good way to start. But I know Peru was already demanding them back.
Yeah, yeah.
And now you mentioned that Peru doesn't have the best track record with being good about sharing.
Oh yeah, that's true. Anyone who's even traveled to Peru, you learn very quickly, because I think what the country is 90% Native American, I believe. They're super proud. They're such a proud people and a proud heritage. When you go and look at some of these sites, if you go to like Cusco, these enormous rocks that are stacked really high and all that, they're so proud of the ingenuity that went into that. So any mention of any help from some extraterrestrial being or terrestrial being that's not human is they see that as a threat, really. So it's kind of hard to interpret how the Peruvian government responds to this stuff.
That's interesting. I mean, that's a different cultural layer, and it's a little one more reason to look at this with a fresh set of eyes. because
Yeah.
this could end up being that. This could end up being the same type of bodies that the government is in possession of. They
Right.
do sort of match the description, you know. So we'll see. I think we should all be demanding that these things go to a third party lab, and that
Yeah.
it's Peru can do away with a little sample. Just a small little sample. We don't need to cut the head off the body. Oh,
Right.
speaking of cutting the head off the body, there was a CAT scan done by the Mexican scientists and doctors and found that they are one body.
Oh yeah. Right.
When the event first happened, one of the quick accusations was that it was a body that was stitched together from other parts.
Right. I remember that. That's right.
And the analysis that came back makes it appear that it's not the case. Those are one body. So it's either something human and unusual, or it's truly unusual.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that was a good
Interesting
one.
story.
It's just there's just more to hopefully we hear more. Hopefully it's a developing story. We don't have to wait another 8 years for some strange presentation.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is a good example of what we would like this phenomenon study to become, which is it goes to an independent lab, the results are made public. And
Right.
then we could all deal with it on our own. I think this phenomenon is so weird, and we should mention why we're calling this season 2 and why season 1 was season 1 is that I think season 1 hopefully gave everyone an idea of a general sense of the shape of this phenomenon.
Right. Yeah.
And we discussed the various points of origin of the phenomenon. So we could always refer and say, oh, like we discussed in season 1. Because in season 2, I think we're going to get a little more specific. And this episode, we're going to get more specific and talk about the hitchhiker effect, which is when paranormal or UFO experiences or anomalous experiences follow someone who either was witness to a UFO sighting or some other type of anomalous event. That first event was triggering, and then the most classic example and the one most related to our work is when someone witnesses a UFO and then goes home and has something resembling poltergeist activity. You've seen some cases like that, right, Bones?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that it seems to be a pretty common theme where it's hard to interpret what's happening. Is it a metaphysical thing that's happening to them, or are they actually catching something?
Right. So maybe that poltergeist activity is representative of the being that was driving the UFO, and it just happens to be invisible at the moment. Because we
Right.
have seen cloaking technology around these UFOs, some very interesting cloaking technology that surrounds these UFOs. I think we have some ideas about how that might work on a craft. But there are some cases where people say they encountered a being that they always describe it the same way, like the Predator in the 1980s, Schwarzenegger film, The
Okay.
Predator. And they
Sure.
call it a Predator style alien. So there are a number of these reports. Those are anecdotal. Take
Yeah.
them with, which means that they come with varying levels of evidence associated with them. But there are absolutely some credible evidence cases of people who say that they encountered something that was predator like. So that's important because maybe what the poltergeist activity that they're encountering is more is the entity itself.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
So
I mean, that's totally understandable. I mean, we could be talking about a whole other dimension that's going on parallel to ours, and we just can't see.
right, we talked about the concept of a shadow biosphere in season 1, and we talked about dark matter and interdimensional concepts. So dark matter and dark energy is one of the ways that we could have something like an interdimensional or shadow biosphere
Okay.
event happening. And if dark matter makes up more of the universe than regular matter, and we can't even see it. So if there's a whole world
Right.
in dark matter and beings in dark matter, intelligence in dark matter, they could be interacting with us that way.
Right.
So that could be what the hitchhiker effect is, but I think there's more to it than that. maybe the best way to tell you more about the hitchhiker effect is to give you an overview of the most well documented series of hitchhiker effect cases, and those are really in association with Skinwalker Ranch. And many of you have probably heard of the Skinwalker Ranch reality TV show, which I don't think does the ranch quite enough justice as far as how important it's been to paranormal and UFO related research. The first thing I would want to tell you about Skinwalker Ranch is that it started as a UFO story. The people, the Sherman family, who owned the ranch prior to the previous owners and the government and the other billionaire that used to own it, the events that followed them for years started with UFOs. So they witnessed UFOs, and then other things started happening. They started seeing cryptids. They started seeing humanoid entities. They started seeing orbs. Maybe it's best for me to go back to the beginning and just briefly give you a history of Skinwalker Ranch. I will link to a couple of our articles in the description, but it's necessary to understand the history of the ranch so that you can assess the credibility of the evidence that I'm going to tell you. So the Shermans owned the ranch. Terry Sherman and his wife and family were out on the ranch, and they started encountering UFOs. Then they encountered some of these things like humanoid entities, cryptids, orbs. The orbs killed some of their dogs. The phenomenon hit a couple of bulls on their ranch that
Right.
they had, right? Remember that story?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
crazy
we
story.
mentioned this before. Yep, yep. That's a crazy story.
So they had all of these other anomalous experiences that we now have to associate with UFOs. And some of that stuff is previously what we would call paranormal. And some of the cryptids that they saw, especially, have been previously associated with paranormal. So it's important to note that all of this was documented by scientists. There's two books that you can read about it that are pretty good: Hunt for Skinwalker and Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. They're both written by George Knapp and Colin Kelleher, who was a scientist on the ranch, as well as James Lukatsky, who was a scientist on the ranch. You can find them everywhere. Those two books will give you the history of the ranch. And I think Knapp did a pretty good job of just covering it. This is such a crazy story. I don't even know how to approach it. I'm like, oh my gosh. How do I say this with any. Maybe I'll just say that. I just have to kind of be casual about it. So, dude, I'm so glad this is season 2 because this is such a crazy story. We're about to open the crazy. I think hopefully we establish
Do
some
it.
credibility. Hopefully we establish some credibility season 1 so we can shoot it all down
Yeah,
season
right,
2.
right. Nah, go for it.
So I think the best example in those books of the hitchhiker effect, and then we'll just start talking more about what the hitchhiker effect is that a group of analysts go to visit the ranch. So Terry Sherman and his family, they're encountering all of this anomalous activity. Some of it seems malevolent. There was incidents of maybe it being giving off a benevolent feeling when they were leaving the ranch. They mentioned so that indicates intelligence. That indicates something that it's not always malevolent. Sometimes it's
Right.
benevolent. I mean, it indicates intelligence. So I think that's
Yeah.
important to mention. And they said when they were leaving the ranch that this thing, some sort of a UFO came up to them and filled them with this warm, nice sensation. And then they sold the ranch to Bob Bigelow, who goes off and he gets a bunch of scientists and they study the ranch for a while. And then they get into a partnership with the U.S. government to study the ranch together. And a group of analysts go out there on one of the earlier excursions, and I think there was 5 of them. And they encounter some sort of an energy or what they seem to think was maybe a portal. It was some sort of a black emptiness in space.
Hmm.
It was giving off like a cold energy. You should really read the books and learn more about it. But they encountered this portal or portal like object, and they did say that they felt some sort of malevolence. They did not get a positive feeling from this portal or door. So they complete their analysis of the ranch. They go home. And probably the most drastic case happens when one of the analysts goes home and then he redeploys to the Middle East because, he's a DoD analyst, and he redeploys, and his family is at home, and they start encountering what people are encountering at Skinwalker Ranch, and they're somewhere
Hmm.
on the East Coast in like Virginia,
Right.
and all of a sudden, the two kids, who I think were teenagers at the time, they start seeing a dog man, and in America, we call the wolf man a dog man.
Right.
And in the south of America, they call it a rougarou. And in other places, in Wisconsin, they call it a dog man. It's called different things all over. In Europe, it's called a werewolf. I refuse to hide from these names. So we're going to start talking about cryptids a lot in season 2. And I refuse to hide from these names because I think they're important. I think that the fact that this thing appears as something that's in our folklore is important. And the last paper I worked on was with a famous folklorist. And I don't know whether or not this thing appearing as something from our folklore is because we believe in it as part of our folklore, or if we believe in it because this thing gave us the idea for what's in our folklore.
Right. Right.
And I think that's a central question. There's many people in the government who have been coming out lately and saying, look, the government doesn't really know how long this thing has been here. Like, that is a central question. If we can understand that, the relationship between this phenomenon and our folklore, it may give us an indication of how long at least we've been interacting with it.
Right. It's embedded in our culture. Just about every culture.
Right. And it could be an exchange where sometimes it gave us the idea for the dog man, but then we took it a little further and then it started going, oh, well, you like the longer ears on the dog man, so I'll do the longer ears.
Right.
And
Right.
it could be an exchange of ideas. And that it starts to seem like something more of what we see around the phenomenon. So these cryptids, they start showing up. These kids see it, and then his wife sees it. She got a malevolent impression off of it, that it was
Okay.
not giving her a very nice, friendly dog man stare. It was an angry dog man stare.
Yeah.
There was these cryptid incidents, and then one of the kids had an incident where he was sleeping and he was attacked by these blue orbs, and they left marks on him. And all of that was recorded and studied. That's why these people were so important. The wife in this situation ended up having some rare immunity issues, like she was
Hmm.
attacked. Some of the symptoms that they're describing, and we talked about this in season 1 about the relationship between UAP and Havana syndrome. Some of them, it just sounds like somewhere in the same range of symptoms
Right.
that this family was describing. So this is where it gets super interesting. Not that all of that isn't morbidly fascinating, but it gets extremely interesting when the kids start going to school, because kids that they are in close contact with start encountering the same thing.
Oh yes. Right.
It spreads like a virus, and that's super important. And this is where I am with my research right now, is trying to wrestle with this idea. There's something super important here. I've been in touch with one of the top parapsychologists in the world on this. And he keeps saying, what is your point? And I keep saying, I don't know. I'm trying to tell you, Jim. I have no idea. But I think there's something super important here, because this is how the phenomenon is making contact with all these people. And if you look at their experiences, if you look at the experience of this wife and family, and the other analysts and some people close to them had, all of them who saw that portal all had similar sort of anomalous experiences follow them and also extend to people that were near them. So they encountered something really powerful there, and it infected them. And then it was able to infect other people around it. But look, here's the really weird thing about that story that I find super fascinating, is that whatever's there at Skinwalker Ranch is there all the time. It's in the Uinta Valley all the time. I don't think I care less about whether it's at Skinwalker Ranch or the neighbor's house, but it's in the Uinta Valley all the time in Utah. and yet it traveled. It used those analysts to travel. Can it
Oh,
travel?
right, right.
So these things are super important. I think it may even this hitchhiker phenomenon. Now that we're discussing it, maybe I'll have more to say. So this phenomenon hitched a ride with them, and it hitched a ride with them like a virus. And we've been calling it the quantum virus, and I think that sort of, or the paranormal virus, and I think that is about right. There's something about contact, and it may be contact with a physical object, and then afterwards, that physical object or that energy is somehow infecting you. And one of the theories by someone who has been on Skinwalker Ranch and Dr. Travis Taylor, who's on all the TV shows, he's done separate interviews where this thing has followed him home, and he's had similar stories happen to him and people close to him. And he's gone to the hospital due to this phenomenon for having been irradiated. So I think he understands this, and I think he's legit. And he was reluctant to even talk about this hitchhiker effect because he doesn't know what stimulates it. And he said the people that are affected don't know what stimulates it. Meaning, if you talk about it, if you believe in it, it may be able to manifest. That gets into the quantum realm. That gets into our beliefs and and our perception and its effect on our reality. So he's an astrophysicist. He's been a government contractor. He's been on TV. He's been very close to this phenomenon, and that is what his response was: is that maybe this involves something to do with quantum entanglement. That once you
Ooh, I
get
like
mixed
that.
up with these things, yeah.
I like that's quantum entanglement.
Now, if we're talking about quantum entanglement and these entities are able to get mixed up with you through quantum entanglement and all of this sort of quantum science, it really sounds like we're probably talking about something interdimensional,
Right.
or something in that ballpark. We go back there a lot,
We
so I think
go
we're
back
gonna.
there a lot for sure. You can't help it. I mean, it's just the mischief. We've mentioned this before in previous episodes. It's just the mischievous behavior almost of this phenomenon. It's like they're not toying with us really, but they're always one step ahead of everyone.
Right. And I think that toying with us is exactly what this is doing. I really like the analogy of the Marco Polo game that you play in the swimming pool.
Okay.
And this is what Skinwalker Ranch seems like to me. You know that where the kid has the blindfold on and he's going Marco, and the other kids are all saying Polo, and they're all splashing him in the face, and getting in his face and saying Polo, and then just diving out of the way and cheating, and the kid can't see that we're the kid in the blindfold. You know,
Right, right, right.
whatever these things are the beings all around us, and that's really what it seems like at Skinwalker Ranch. That's what the impression the government's got. That's why they gave up. They sold the ranch to a different billionaire,
Hmm.
and said we're out because the thing was just toying with them. There's a Colonel John Alexander is a pretty important voice, I think, as far as listening to someone on the phenomenon, and he is a scientist and a soldier, and he's also one of the guys that the George Clooney character in the Men Who Stare at Goats movie, if
Oh
anyone's
yeah.
seen that. Although I think Colonel John Alexander has a lot to say about whether or not they were actually trying to kill goats. So I'll let you can look all that up. But they were doing remote viewing experiments. So Colonel John
Right.
Alexander was doing remote viewing experiments, and that character that George Clooney was based on, he said, was based on an amalgam of several of the people that were in the program. But this guy, John Alexander, went on to become part of trying to build a new army. He said that at the end of Vietnam, the US government knew that the army was broken. So they were open to these new ideas. And it
Hmm.
was, the 70s, and all of a sudden, free love, right? And they were like, how do we get some of that in the military? So, he went out and looked into all sorts of fringe stuff. And the stuff that worked, of course, the military is interested in. And he's ended up on a ton of these projects. And he's a very smart, well-spoken, intelligent guy. Check out some of his lectures. He's given some lectures on to MUFON that are very interesting. So when he talks about this phenomenon at Skinwalker Ranch, and he says the same thing we do all the time, which I guess should make us feel good. And that's the government has no idea what this is.
Hmm.
This guy's been around government work and this phenomenon for 30 years now. He's saying that. So I definitely want to emphasize that not all of these experiences are negative. So James Lukatsky, who showed up at Skinwalker Ranch, he encountered a Mobius strip,
A
which
what?
is a Mobius strip. That's a three-dimensional representation of an infinity object. So if you were to run along one side of the Mobius strip, you could run forever.
Oh, okay, okay. I've heard of that.
And right, it shows up a lot, and I think the fact that it shows up in science fiction is important because when James Lukatsky shows up to Skinwalker Ranch, and he's the one who's going to decide whether or not to go back to the government and ask for money for this program, he sees a Mobius strip appear in front of him.
Hmm, okay.
And then he goes back and asks for funding to go check out whatever this crazy thing is. And when you're showing somebody in a Mobius strip, it also sort of indicates that you understand the secrets of space and time.
Hmm.
These things aren't terribly honest, but they might. So that got the government interested. And that wasn't a bad experience. So these things pick and choose their targets. And the experiences are different. And we've asked this question before, but I think it's worth asking again because it's something I want to keep exploring. And that's, are they different entities? Is that why they're good or bad experiences? Or are these all intended effects? Like the effect on Lukatsky was had an intended effect, right?
Right.
But it brought the government out to the ranch.
Right.
The
Sure.
effect on these analysts then was the opposite. It was like, oh, but you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
Or it was sending mixed messages with intent.
Yeah. It's hard to
So
say.
it's really hard to say. But understanding that is really important because I think there's a couple of things that you have to understand in intelligence analysis, and that's capabilities and intent. And right now, we've talked about a lot of the capabilities in season one. In fact, that was our focus. And we said, we think we should call these things ultra terrestrial because it's really an indication of their capabilities. The point of origin is almost irrelevant when it comes to are they good or bad for us?
Right.
And then there's intent. And as we've said, the intent is mixed. So but I don't think that means that it's open ended. I think it either means that the intent is mixed because that mixed intent is trying to create a narrative or a societal effect, or we're just dealing with different entities. We're dealing with multiple intelligences, and they have different attitudes towards us.
Yeah. It could be. I mean, it seems that way for sure. Really, if you think about it.
So all of this stuff at Skinwalker Ranch and all of this UFO stuff, and this is where things get uncomfortable and controversial. And we move from being science based to being called loons, except we shouldn't, because that's why we did season one. Because everything that we're going to tell you now should be covered.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
when we start talking about these cryptids, I mean, if we're talking about something that's interdimensional, we talked about how things can be subjective and objective. So, yeah, it's a cryptid. Yeah, it's a Bigfoot. So what? I mean, it could have
Yeah.
been a 12-foot Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle if this thing wanted. It doesn't matter. So, we're not telling you that Bigfoot exists. We're telling you that something can be whatever it wants to be. And if it wanted
Right.
to be a Bigfoot for 10 years, it probably could.
Yeah. And it's always one step ahead. Doesn't
It's
matter where you
always,
are.
yeah. Yeah.
But they're
So,
everywhere.
but they're everywhere. And so this is where it gets really controversial, right? Because we are going to absolutely be connecting UFOs to cryptids. We're going to absolutely be connecting UFOs to ghosts or poltergeist-like
Sure.
behavior, because all of this hitchhiker-like effect stuff shows up in paranormal research. We've talked a lot about the science of UFOs because I think it's the easiest for people to digest. When I first got into this, all of this, I had to come in through UFOs because I'm a technologist. And I wasn't going to believe anything else except for that there was something in the sky that flew that I didn't understand. That I could believe. I couldn't believe any of the other stuff.
Right.
So I think that that's the best path, is that you come in through UFOs. But once you understand that everything that we've told you about UFOs, and just like we've talked about with this hitchhiker effect, there are identical studies by scientists, by professionals, by parapsychologists, by psychologists who point to the fact that all of these hitchhiker like effects happen with paranormal stuff as well. Haunted areas, people pick up entities at haunted locations, the same
Right.
way somebody picked up an entity at Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch is a UFO story. Does that mean all haunted places are related to the same phenomenon? We don't know. But I'll tell you, just because that's a scary question doesn't mean it's not a great question. It's a great question, and I'm not going to hide from it. But you almost have to hide from it when you're doing this kind of UFO research, because there are people who don't like peanut butter in their chocolate. They don't want.
Or chocolate in their peanut butter.
So all of Skinwalker Ranch by those people gets called, the cuckoo fun house of Dogman, Wolfman.
Right.
Oh, those people are all crazy and they're all ghost stories for scientists. You could think whatever the hell you want, but there are great scientists who've done very good research on ghosts specifically
Yeah.
that have nothing to do with UFOs. So the connection between these locations and their research, I'm not going to ignore it just because people
No,
find
of
that controversial.
course not.
We're Forteans. It's exactly what we do.
That's right. To
To fort,
fort,
harumph, harumph, to fort, harumph. A little nod to the Papa. It's good to bring up Fort because Fort figured this out 100 years ago. He said all of this stuff is related. And Fort seemed to think that we are property. Something else is here and it owns us and we're part of its game.
Right.
It's not so dissimilar from what John Keel decided at the end of his research, too. It kind of looks like that, but I think that maybe is an easy out. I don't think we're going to end there.
No, it's not a predator and prey situation. I don't think.
No, it seems more like a resource.
Yeah.
Seems like we're a resource. You're a fine resource. Has anyone ever told you that?
Me? Me?
Yeah,
Really? Oh well, I appreciate that. I think.
absolutely. There's a lot
Oh.
of you.
Oh.
I mean,
Oh. I do.
we could
Oh.
they could eat for months.
Yeah. I'm storing a lot of energy.
There's some scientists studying this. There's parapsychologists studying this. There's a great organization called the Society for Scientific Exploration, and it includes a lot of very reputable, credible scientists, professors who are willing to study stuff like this. And they publish in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And the editor of that journal, as well as the assistant editor, put together a massive haunted person study. And as part of that study, what they found were that there's 4 core features of haunted people syndrome. That the meaning or narrative around a haunted experience is influenced by personal backgrounds or beliefs or personality. That's number 1. And we kind of just talked about that. Like, this phenomenon is subjective and objective. So this sort of talking about the subjective part. Again, this seems very UFO related here. And the second thing is that anxiety and distress regarding hauntings are a function of the nature and closeness of the anomalous experience. Then third, distress and unease make an anomalous experience more likely to occur. A lot of this stuff gets reported in UFO cases. One of the things that comes up a lot in UFO research and paranormal research that they say a lot is liminal, that people are in a liminal state, which means a state of change. And that brings on distress and unease. Your life's all shifting, and all of a
Right.
sudden, this shows up in the middle of it. And this happens a lot. Paranormal and UFO cases. So that's weird. And it indicates that we also talked about the relationship between this UFO phenomenon and consciousness. It indicates something on a deeper level is happening here. And then the last thing that they found, which is most important to this hitchhiker effect phenomenon, is that anomalous experiences tend to be contagious. They can spread to others. Extremely important. So one of the ancient examples of this that was a big concern was possession and demons, right?
Sure.
People thought somebody got possessed by a demon. Oh, and then the priest could get it out of them and it would go into somebody else.
Right.
And possession is now part of the DSM and considered a official mental health condition.
Oh,
and then,
interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And people fought for that for a long time because it does happen. And there's a lot written about why it happens psychologically. But then you go, well, is there cases of supernatural possession? Are there cases of UFO possession? The answer, according to our research, is yes, both. Certainly not most of them. I think that the psychology of possession is fascinating, but we're not psychiatrists. So what really interests us as Forteans is, well, did anything move around? Well, it happened.
Right.
And so, yeah, we looked around and we did find some of that. And we actually found somebody who experienced that with multiple witnesses and met all of our standard of evidence. So I think we're going to have our first guest on Fortean Wins.
Yeah, that's great. I look forward to that.
Yeah, this will probably be our most popular episode ever, too. Right.
So he's had an experience of possession.
So this person was not possessed. They have witnessed a possession. They witnessed an exorcism, and they are also an experiencer. So we'll talk to this person about some of the experiences that followed them and run in their family. And that's also very interesting to me, is that experiencers, lifelong experiencers, which we've already mentioned, that this runs in families, that this phenomenon and these anomalous experiences tend to run in families. So we say it likely points to a genetic component. And here we are looking at something that seems more viral. And that's fascinating to me. I think that there's probably a link there. We could be looking at something that is just that easy, right?
Right.
It's just a virus. I don't think it is that easy.
Or a mind worm, perhaps.
Ooh, mind worm. Good one to talk to following up on this hitchhiker effect affair. So if you'd like to know more about the hitchhiker phenomenon, check out our article, The Hitchhiker Effect, the Paranormal Virus. I would also recommend The Hunt for Skinwalker and Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Those will be our media recommendations for this time around.
Yeah, I think the article on our website would be a really great introduction too. So if this is all new to you, I would go to the website for sure and read that article.
Yeah. I guess, we didn't plan this, but this possession episode is coming right up on Halloween, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Perfect timing. Yeah, that's going to be fun. That should be great.
I don't even know that it's Halloween. Forteans are spooky all year.
Yeah, right. So, hey, that's great. I can't wait. That's going to be fun. It's great talking to you, Ram. Thanks for this episode. This is season 2, everyone. Get ready. Strap in.
Yeah, I'm excited for season 2. We're going to talk about some crazy stuff. We start with the hitchhiker effect, and then we're going to go into possession, and then we'll probably just dive right into cryptids. All of them.
I'm ready.
Let's get nuts.
Let's go. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening.
All right, see y'all.